The night was supposed to be like any other, quiet, peaceful, with nothing out of the ordinary. But for Jessica Moore, that night would mark the end of everything. A violent house fire consumed the small suburban home. Neighbors could see the thick, dark smoke rising into the sky, a glowing orange hue flickering in the distance. The fire department rushed to the scene, but when the flames were finally extinguished, what they discovered inside would shock the community to its core. Inside the house, amidst the devastation, was Jessica's body. A 28-year-old woman, 8 months pregnant, her life taken from her far too soon. But the most haunting detail? She hadn't perished in the fire. No, she had been strangled before the flames had even started. The fire wasn't the cause of her death, it was the cover-up. But why? Why would anyone want to kill Jessica, a woman whose only crime was looking forward to a future full of hope and promise, soon to welcome a child into the world? Was this simply a tragic accident, a random act of violence? Or was it something far more calculated? Something much darker, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be uncovered? This isn't just a story about a fire. It's the beginning of a mystery that would unravel secrets no one could have imagined. A story of a life lost, a family shattered, and a killer who thought they could erase the truth. But sometimes, the truth refuses to stay hidden. Sometimes, the pieces don't add up, and what seems like a senseless tragedy turns out to be something much more chilling. What really happened that night inside that house? Stay with us as we explore the case that would leave investigators watching her child grow up in a home filled with questioning everything. She was overjoyed at the idea of becoming a mother, and she shared that excitement with everyone around her. Daniel, though he was more reserved about his emotions, was equally thrilled. He began to work overtime at his job as a mechanic, saving up for the future. The two of them were preparing for what they believed would be the happiest time of their lives. They were ready to welcome their baby into a world of love and comfort. But as the weeks went by, something strange began to happen, something that no one could have predicted. Jessica's happiness started to be overshadowed by something darker. To those closest to her, it wasn't obvious at first, but there were subtle changes in her behavior. She seemed a little more tired than usual, her smile wasn't as wide, and her phone calls with Daniel seemed more tense. Some friends began to notice the cracks forming beneath the surface, but it wasn't until later that anyone would begin to understand the truth. Behind the scenes, Jessica was growing increasingly worried about her relationship with Daniel. There were whispers of arguments, unresolved tension, and moments of unease that would later be described by close friends as off. But Jessica, ever the optimist, always brushed it off. She said things were fine, that every relationship had its ups and downs, and that they were just going through a rough patch. She wanted to believe in the future they had planned. She wanted to believe that everything would work out for her and Daniel, and for their baby. But the day the fire started, the day everything came to an end, there were no signs, no warnings. Just an ordinary evening that would soon be ripped apart by a nightmare no one saw coming. That evening, Jessica and Daniel were at home. The house, a cozy 2-story structure just on the outskirts of town, was in its final stages of preparation for their baby's arrival. The crib had been set up in the nursery, the baby's clothes neatly folded in drawers, and the nursery was decorated with soft colors and gentle patterns. They had spent the weekend buying last-minute items, making sure everything was ready for the baby's arrival. It was a time of anticipation, of planning for the future. And while there had been some tension in their relationship, Jessica had tried to stay optimistic. She believed that once their baby was born, things would get better. But that night, everything changed. Around midnight, the house was suddenly ablaze. Neighbors who lived nearby heard the crackling of flames and rushed outside to see what was happening. Thick, black smoke billowed into the night sky, and the flames were fierce and relentless. The fire department was quickly dispatched, but when they arrived, the house was already consumed by the inferno. By the time the firefighters managed to bring the flames under control, there was little left of the home, only charred remains, and the stench of smoke filled the air. The first responders did what they could to search for survivors, but it wasn't long before they discovered Jessica's body. It wasn't what they had expected. They had presumed that she had perished in the fire. But there was something disturbing about the way she was found. Jessica's body was lying in the hallway, near the back of the house. There was no sign of burns, no sign of smoke inhalation. The fire hadn't claimed her life. Someone else had. Someone had strangled her, and then, as if trying to erase the evidence, set the house on fire. The fire department quickly ruled out the possibility of an accidental fire. This wasn't an ordinary fire. It wasn't a tragic accident. This was a murder. As the news broke in the community, it quickly spread like wildfire. The question started almost immediately. Who could have done this to Jessica? She was so well-liked, so loved. She had no known enemies. And her pregnancy, her unborn child, made the whole thing seem even more unfathomable. Investigators were faced with a crime scene that defied all logic. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing appeared to be missing from the house. It wasn't a robbery gone wrong. The fire seemed to have been deliberately set, but the real mystery lay in why Jessica had been killed in the first place. The scene was eerily calculated, but what motive could there have been? All eyes turned to the one person who had been closest to her in the final days of her life, Daniel Moore, her fiancé. At first, the community struggled to accept the possibility that Daniel could be involved. He was, after all, the father of her child, the person she had trusted most. But the police were determined to leave no stone unturned, and as they dug deeper into the couple's relationship, things started to look less clear-cut. Daniel had been at the house that night, and his story was beginning to raise red flags. He told investigators that he had been asleep in the house when the fire broke out, but something didn't quite add up. His alibi was shaky at best, and his emotional response to Jessica's death seemed strange to those who knew him best. As detectives began to piece together the evidence, they found contradictions in Daniel's statements and inconsistencies in his behavior. But was he guilty of murder, or was there another explanation? Something far more complicated, a hidden secret, a betrayal that no one had anticipated? The investigation continued, but with every new lead, the truth seemed to slip further away. The only thing that was clear was that Jessica Moore's life had been violently stolen, and the truth of what really happened that night was more elusive than anyone could have imagined. The night of the fire started like any other. The cool air of late autumn wrapped around the small suburban neighborhood where Jessica and Daniel lived. The streets were quiet, as most people had settled in for the night. Inside their home, Jessica was alone. Daniel had been working late at the mechanic shop, as he often did, staying behind to finish up repairs on a car that needed urgent attention. Their plans to settle in for the evening had been simple. Jessica was going to read a few parenting books she'd been given by friends, perhaps sip some tea, and try to get some rest before the chaos of early motherhood arrived. She had spent the day organizing baby clothes, packing hospital bags, and checking everything off the long list she'd compiled months before. Though there had been underlying tension in her relationship with Daniel in recent weeks, Jessica had managed to push those feelings aside. Tonight was supposed to be peaceful. It was supposed to be just her and the baby, one last quiet evening before their lives were forever changed. But around 11:30 p.m., something disrupted the calm. A neighbor who had been out walking their dog was the first to see it, a faint flicker in the distance. At first, it seemed like nothing more than the reflection of passing headlights on the windows, but then the flickering grew brighter, and soon the entire house was outlined in an eerie orange glow. Thick black smoke began to pour from the windows of the Moore home, and a few moments later, flames erupted from the back of the house. Terrified, the neighbor immediately called 911. "Fire! Fire! There's a house on fire!" They shouted into the phone, the panic in their voice unmistakable. The dispatcher quickly relayed the emergency, sending the fire department out on the double. By the time the fire trucks arrived, The flames had completely engulfed the back of the house, and thick, acrid smoke filled the air. The fire department was on the scene within minutes, but the house was already a near total loss. From the outside, it was hard to tell how anyone could have survived such a destructive blaze. The heat was so intense, the flames so furious, that the firefighters had to battle not just the blaze, but the collapsing structure as well. The windows were shattered, the roof was already partially caved in, and the entire building seemed to groan under the pressure of the fire. It wasn't long before the fire department discovered that this wasn't just any fire. Firefighters began searching the premises, trying desperately to determine if anyone was still inside. Their worst fears were soon confirmed. It wasn't the fire that had killed Jessica, at least not directly. No, something more disturbing had happened, something far more calculated. They found Jessica's body in the hallway of the house, near the back door. Her arms and legs were untouched by the flames, her clothing still intact. There were no signs of burns or smoke inhalation. But what the investigators would discover next would send chills down their spines. Jessica Moore had been strangled. There were no signs of a struggle, no obvious injuries, except for the marks around her neck. Her body had been carefully positioned, almost as if placed there deliberately. It was a shocking contradiction to the nature of the fire. If the fire had been intended to conceal the crime, it had failed. The flames had done little more than expose the horrifying truth. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a spontaneous disaster. Someone had murdered Jessica before setting the house alight. The fire department quickly called the police, and within moments, a team of detectives arrived at the scene. The house, still smoldering in parts, was a crime scene now, a chilling backdrop to what would become an even darker mystery. As the police combed through the wreckage, trying to make sense of the scene, the questions began to pile up. How had the fire started? Why had Jessica been killed? And why, above all, was the house set on fire afterward? As investigators began their preliminary sweep, they noticed that the house was eerily devoid of any signs of forced entry. No broken windows, no pried open doors. Everything seemed normal. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong, nor was it a random act of violence. It was clear now, this murder was personal. Whoever had done this knew Jessica, knew her routines, and had planned this carefully. The fire's intensity was part of a calculated attempt to destroy evidence. Whoever had murdered Jessica wanted to make it look like the fire had killed her, but they had underestimated how much the smoke and fire would reveal. The lack of any burn marks on Jessica's body immediately raised questions. If she had been alive when the fire started, her body would have been scorched, her skin charred by the intense heat, her lungs filled with smoke. But there was none of that. So, what had happened to Jessica before the fire? And more importantly, where was Daniel? As the investigation unfolded, one theory began to take shape. The fire had been deliberately set, but not in a rush. It had been planned, and that left only one question. Was it possible that Daniel, the very person who should have been there to protect her, was involved? Investigators started questioning him immediately. They learned that Daniel had been working late that night, finishing up repairs at the shop. He claimed he hadn't arrived home until after the fire started, but his timeline seemed off. The police needed more than just his word, they needed proof. Meanwhile, in the town, word quickly spread about the tragedy. Friends, family, and even casual acquaintances of Jessica's could hardly believe what had happened. To them, she had been the picture of health, of joy, preparing for the arrival of a child with the man she loved. It made no sense. How could anyone want to harm her? And why? The idea that someone in Jessica's life, someone close to her, was capable of this level of violence left everyone in disbelief. Some of Jessica's closest friends began to piece together small details that seemed odd in hindsight. There had been whispers of tension in her relationship with Daniel. Nothing major, but enough to raise questions. A few friends recalled conversations where Jessica had expressed feeling like something was off in their relationship. She had even said, only a few weeks before the fire, that she wasn't sure if Daniel was as excited about the pregnancy as she was. She had said, he's distant sometimes, like he's hiding something. But was it enough to suggest he was capable of murder? Investigators couldn't be sure yet, but they knew that everything, every detail, would need to be examined. The fire had been meant to destroy evidence, but instead, it had opened the door to a much larger mystery. A young woman, full of life and hope, had been taken from this world in the most brutal of ways. And as the investigation began to unfold, it became clear that nothing about Jessica's death was as simple as it seemed. Underscore 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 underscore. This portion of the story gives a detailed account of the night of the fire, building tension and revealing the chilling facts about the crime scene. It sets the stage for the investigation that follows, showing the eerie calm before the storm and how the discovery of Jessica's body and the strange circumstances surrounding the fire raise more questions than answers. As investigators continued to piece together the details of Jessica's death, more questions began to surface. Was it a house fire gone horribly wrong? Could the fire have started accidentally, with Jessica trapped inside? But how do you explain the lack of burns on her body? Why was she found strangled, not consumed by the flames? Or was it a deliberate act to cover something far darker? Was the fire set intentionally to destroy evidence of a more gruesome crime? If so, who would want to hide such a thing? What motive could drive someone to murder a pregnant woman in such a calculated way? Did Daniel have something to hide? Could he have staged the fire to cover up a crime of passion? Or was he just a grieving fiancé, caught in the chaos of an unimaginable tragedy? The deeper the investigation went, the more unsettling the questions became. Something was off, and with each answer, new mysteries arose. The truth was still elusive, but the shadows surrounding this case were growing darker. The fire was intense. Thick smoke poured from the windows, filling the streets. Firefighters, with the urgency of men fighting not just a fire, but an unknown threat, rushed to the scene. When they finally managed to get inside, the situation was chilling. Among the charred remnants of the house, something caught their eye. A body, but it wasn't burned. No, not a mark, not a scar from the fire's wrath. Jessica Moore, the 28-year-old woman who had been preparing for the arrival of her baby, lay motionless in the hallway. Her body was cold, lifeless, but it was clear from the scene. This was no accidental death from smoke inhalation or the flames. She had been strangled. A cord or wire, the type one might find lying around the house, was wrapped tightly around her neck. A method of death that suggested intent, not an accident. The fire hadn't been the cause of death. It had come after. A deliberate act to mask something far more gruesome. Firefighters had done their best, but they couldn't save Jessica. The fire had been raging, yet the body remained untouched by its heat. The cause of death? Strangulation. The fire. Was it meant to destroy the evidence? Or was there something more twisted happening here? The investigators took over the scene. They thought at first that this could be a failed arson attempt, that maybe Jessica's life had been caught in the flames by accident. But as they combed through the wreckage, they found something that didn't add up. Something that changed everything. What was off about this crime scene? There were no signs of forced entry. The front door had been locked, yet everything inside seemed untouched. Jessica's wallet, her phone, her personal belongings, no sign of a struggle or any attempt to steal them. It made no sense. If someone had broken in, why hadn't they taken anything? Then there was the fire itself. While it appeared to have been deliberately set, the question remained. Why strangle Jessica before setting the house alight? If the killer's intent was simply to destroy the house and its contents, why go to the trouble of ensuring she was dead before the flames even touched her? The more the investigators thought about it, the more questions surfaced. Jessica Moore wasn't just a random victim caught in a tragic fire. This wasn't just a house fire gone horribly wrong. Something deeper was at play. With no obvious leads, the investigators turned their focus on those closest to Jessica. And the first person they looked at was Daniel Moore, her fiancé. The man who should have been there for her, protecting her. He was the one who had called the fire department, reporting the blaze. He had arrived soon after, but by then it was too late. At first, Daniel seemed like a grieving fiancé, heartbroken by the loss of his future wife and child. He claimed to be out of town on a business trip when the fire occurred. He had an airtight alibi, or so he thought. But the deeper the investigation went, the more unsettling it became. As detectives dug into Daniel's life, they discovered things about him that didn't add up. He had financial troubles, huge debts, and perhaps more troubling, whispers about an affair. Could this man, who appeared so broken by grief, be hiding something more? Financial records revealed large sums of money disappearing from the couple's accounts, money that would have been needed to support a growing family. Was Daniel facing financial ruin? Was Jessica planning to leave him, to take the baby and everything she had worked for? And that wasn't all. Jessica's friends began to recall conversations they'd had with her in the weeks leading up to her death. Conversations where Jessica openly expressed her growing doubts about her relationship. She had begun to suspect Daniel was seeing someone else. She was afraid of being trapped in a marriage that was falling apart. But could Daniel's affair, combined with his financial struggles, have led him to take such a drastic step? As the investigation deepened, a disturbing revelation came to light. Daniel had taken out a life insurance policy on Jessica, one that she had no knowledge of. A large sum that would ensure he was financially stable for years to come, if something happened to her. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but the truth wasn't clear yet. What had driven Daniel to murder his fiancée in such a brutal, calculated way? Was it just about the money, or was there more to the story? Then a breakthrough. A phone call. Forensic analysis revealed that Jessica's phone had placed a call to Daniel's work number, just hours before the fire. But the timing was off. Daniel had claimed to be miles away at a hotel, yet his phone's location pinged from nearby. Why was his phone so close to the house? It wasn't just a phone call. Investigators uncovered something far more damning: surveillance footage. Footage that showed Daniel entering the house that night, after he had claimed to be in another city. The timeline didn't match. Daniel had lied. He had returned to confront Jessica about her affair, about the life insurance policy, about the state of their crumbling relationship. In a fit of rage, he had strangled her. Afterward, in a desperate attempt to cover his tracks and make it look like an accident, he set the house on fire. What was his motive? It wasn't just personal betrayal. It was financial ruin. If Jessica left him, if she took the baby, Daniel's life would unravel. He couldn't bear the thought of losing everything. So he killed her, his own fiancée, taking the life he'd once promised to protect. The arrest came quickly. Daniel Moore, the man who had once promised to love and cherish Jessica, was now facing charges for her murder and the death of their unborn child. The trial began, and the courtroom was filled with shocked family and friends. People who couldn't understand how the man they once knew as kind, loving, and caring could have committed such a brutal act. Daniel's defense tried to argue that he was simply a man under extreme emotional distress, pushed to the brink by betrayal and mounting financial pressures. But the evidence was overwhelming. His lies, the phone call, the financial motive, the incriminating surveillance footage, it all pointed to one thing: Daniel Moore had planned this murder. The prosecution painted him as a cold-blooded killer, willing to do anything to secure his financial future, even if it meant ending the life of the woman he claimed to love. The verdict was swift. Daniel Moore was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Daniel Moore was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. The community was left in disbelief, struggling to understand how someone could kill the person they loved for financial gain. The case left a scar on the people who knew Jessica, but it also left us with a haunting question. Was this just a case of a man pushed to the edge by betrayal and financial ruin? Or was there something even darker at play? What do you think? Do you believe the police missed any crucial evidence? Or is there more to this case than we'll ever know? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more chilling true crime tales. If you're fascinated by the twisted lies that people tell, and the deadly consequences that follow, be sure to like and share this video with anyone who loves true crime mysteries. If you thought this story was shocking, wait until you hear about the unsolved disappearance of a prominent doctor, a case that took decades to crack. You won't believe the twist that was uncovered years later. Stay tuned, because the truth doesn't always stay buried forever. Until then, remember, the most dangerous lies are often the ones we tell ourselves.